All right, everyone. We'll start a couple minutes early, or 1 minute early for a change. Hope you all. All right, everyone. Let me start a couple minutes early, or 1 minute early for a change. And I've got an echo. All right, everyone. That was my ode to Jimi Hendrix. A little bit of echo there for you. Okay, turn my speaker off, so it should be okay. And there goes my camera. I'm falling apart here, guys. I'm falling apart. Okay. Now I think I'm okay. So what I'm going to work on tonight for the next couple hours is this sci-fi bug that I started last time. You can see I got my reference right here. A bunch of crazy bugs. And so this again is kind of like informed design. In other words, I'm using principles of actual biology or entomology to create an original insect. And if I turn on all the subtools, you can see last time I did a block out and I started working on the head. So you can see the back, the body here, the thorax and the legs and the abdomen. This is all just blocked out. So we're going to get to that over the next few sessions. And of course I will add wings as well. But I like to focus on the head first because that's where I get, the personality of the insect and kind of figure out where it's going from there. So one thing I want to do is I want to fix something that I didn't really like last time, and that's with the eyes. If you notice the eyes here, they look okay, except for I have these little splotchy parts. Let me get this out of the way for a second. Like this right here is not very neat, and it looks ugly. And I was fooling around with some settings in the noise, the surface noise, and I realized that maybe tweaking those a little bit better, I'll get a cleaner result. Because the eyes are already at 5 million, so there should be plenty of geometry to support this kind of detail. So let's take a look at this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to like maybe here, maybe right here, and I'm just going to delete higher levels of resolution. I've got symmetry on, and just smooth this just to clear it out. So I'm just going to do it over again, and it only takes it doesn't take that long. Let's turn on the solo button so we can see what's going on here. The other thing is I don't need the hexagon pattern on the inside of the eyes, so we can hide that. And if you'll recall, just as a quick review, I did set these up with polygroups, and I also created UVs. So if I take a look down here in UV map and I do morph UV, you can see this is what the UVs look like. And the reason I'm creating UVs is because I can use the UV setting in the surface noise option to make a better hexagon pattern. So what I want to do here is that smoothing kind of lost some of the sharpness here, so I'm going to go and pull this out just a little bit, make it a little bit more exaggerated, kind of like the mantis eyes, which are kind of crazy. The orchid mantis has really wild eyes. So get that, and pull this in like so. Get these set up so I don't have to do too many changes later. Right, okay. And if I take a look at my reference here, just so we can sort of see some of the things I'm playing with, as you can see with the wasp eyes, you have these weird processes. It's a bizarro shape. And as I mentioned before, if we take a look at the mantis eyes, you can see how they actually have these little pointy bits on some mantises, not all of them, obviously. And the pattern that I'm making is this hexagonal pattern. These are the ommatidia. So each one of these is a lens that sits on top of a long tube, and each one of those tubes is basically a light detector. That's how the insects see. Okay, so lots of cool inspiration there. Okay, so let's move this up a little bit and subdivide a few more times. Up to 5 million. And, all right, yeah, I know. I can adjust the head here in a little bit. Let's sort of get this the shape that I want. Okay. Awesome. This is where the antennae are going to come out of. Okay, now the fun part. Let's go back into the surface noise. So I'll go to surface. This is in the tool palette, of course. I'm in the tool palette, surface, turn on the noise. Now this is the pattern that I had last week. One of the things I like about surface noise is when you create whatever settings you do, it's saved with the tool, so you can open up the tool later on and all the settings will still be there. But you can see it looks a little bit, it looks okay, but sometimes you get little splotchy bits. So let's take a look at the noise. I'll hit edit, and here is the noise maker. I have my basic noise set to 0. The basic noise, of course, is just a regular procedural noise, and I'm using the noise plugin to create the hexagon pattern. Now, I really hate this interface. It's so bizarre because it's a window within a window, and then if I open the noise plugin by hitting the edit button, I have yet another window, and sometimes it's a little bit hard to see exactly what's going on as you change these settings, how it updates over here. But what I discovered after fooling around is the first thing you want to do is set the scale to 1. If this is a lower number than 1, then you get artifacts and yuckiness there. So I'm going to set that to 1. Of course, that makes this really, really big. So now what I can do is let's try moving down the tile radius and see how low we can get that, and then the mortar thickness. Let's decrease that till we get something like, maybe something like this, right? And I want to make sure that my randomize is set to 0 here. So this is as small as it's letting me get it. I can't seem to get it. Well, let's try that. That works pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to want it smaller than that, but at least this looks pretty good. There's not as many weird artifacts here. So just as you're designing insects, keep in mind that the smaller each of the lenses are on the eyes, the higher resolution it's going to be for the insect, right? It's just like a resolution on a screen, right? Imagine each one of these hexagons as being a pixel. So the more pixels the insect has, the higher resolution an image it will get. And if you're designing a flying insect or an insect that is predatory, then you definitely want to have it with high resolution eyes. If you're designing an insect that's burrowing in the ground, like an ant or something like that, then you probably want to have a very low resolution eye because they don't need to see that much. Seeing is not as important to them as, say, something like smelling. Okay, a little bit of whatever there. So let's choose OK here, and now I'm going to see if I can change the plugin scale and get this down and see if I still have a little bit of artifacts there, but it's not as bad as it was. This noise scale is not going to do anything. Notice I have this set to UV right here. So let's see if I can get it down a little bit more and zoom in a little bit, and I'll choose OK. Let's see. So that's definitely better than it was. That's a huge improvement over what I had last week. There's a little bit of pinching here and there because of the geometry I have for the eye. You know, I could probably improve that if I really spent some time on the geometry of the eye. I think it works pretty well. So now that I have this, what I'm going to do is choose mask by noise. And then we can see there's the mask. It's a little bit spotty in some places, so one thing we could do, let's try this. I'm going to do grow mask. I'm not crazy about that. Let's try boost mask. And it's better than it was last time. Still a few artifacts. So one thing I like to do here, there are a couple of things you can do. I can apply the inflate here and actually get the ommatidia to look good. Or what I could do is like what I did last time, which is actually use poly paint to fix some of the problems here. But let's do one more thing. I'm going to clear the mask I'm going to go back to surface, noise, edit, and let's go into the noise plugin, edit, and see if I increase that mortar thickness just a little bit to something like this. And now let's choose OK. And now let's choose mask by noise. And that's a lot better. So that mortar thickness is what's really helping to eliminate some of the issues that I'm having here with, that looks pretty darn good. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So just tweaking some settings there. And now I'm going to go down to deformation, and I'm just going to hit the inflate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this right here and just start to pump it up a little bit. Sometimes if you hide the mask, it's easier to see what's going on. So I'm going to press Control H to hide the mask. And then I'll just go in here and maybe type in 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. Just get it a little bit more inflated. And then with the mask still applied, I'm going to go in here and just hit it with a smooth brush. So I haven't cleared the mask. The mask is still on there, but it gets rid of some of that extra noise. And that's looking a lot better than it did last week. So we got a UV seam right here. I'm not going to worry about that too much because it's on the back of the eye, but I could always go in and fix it if I needed to. And just rearrange my UVs. But you get the basic idea of the technique here. So I think this is a great way to do insect eyes. Now, in terms of this, you know, we have smaller ommatidia here than down here. That's not unusual. That does happen on insects, especially like dragonflies. If you look at dragonflies, the bottom part of the eye, like this part, is actually going to have smaller ommatidia, and they're going to be denser. It's called the acute zone than the top of the eye, because think of it this way, is the insect is flying, it's using this part of the eye to spot the prey, and this part of the eye is seeing the rest of the environment. So that's definitely, let's call it biologically correct, or biologically plausible, let's say that. Okay, so I have the eyes now. They look a lot better than they did last time. I'm going to clear the mask, and let's choose Save Next, so that we don't have to redo that. And we'll take a sip of beer. You don't have to drink the beer, but if you want to. Okay, so what I want to work on next, I can continue to work on the eye here, the head. I can make a few fixes here, but I think right now, in terms of establishing more of the personality of the bug, we did the mandibles last week. There's more to do on the mandibles. We got the eyes looking good. Let's take a look at this, because it's got a lot of open spaces here. And let's see, this I think is still in Dynamesh mode. So yeah, so let's close the holes, and it's kind of gross, so what I'm going to do, let's do that. Okay, let's close holes, and I'm going to close up this spot right here. A couple ways you can do that. I mean, one way to do that is I could go into sculptors mode with the inflate brush. This is a little messy, so another way to do this is I think I'm going to use an insert mesh brush and just throw some primitives in there like a sphere. Let's do this. I'm going to press W for the gizmo, and go over here, and let's make this bigger. Whoops, that's not bigger. Make sure that we have local symmetry on. Whoops. There we go. I'm just going to close up this whole space here. Actually, there's a better way to do this. Let's go back in time. Right here, let's go over to subtools. I'm going to find my eyes. And let's duplicate this, duplicate the eyes. Turn off solo, go down here. I'm just going to use this as a way to plug up the holes here, since they're already kind of in the shape, so don't need to spend too much extra time trying to get a sphere to work in here. Turn off Sculpting mode, right? Right. Okay, and then I'm just gonna, here's the head, here's the little rough eyes, so I'm just gonna do merge down, merge down, okay, and then I'll go in here with the insert mesh and just plug up this stuff. It'll make it a lot easier to Z-remesh if I don't have these weird empty spaces here. This is not like an exact science. It's just like blobbing, putting blobs of clay into a sculpture, right? Got a little flake going there. Good enough. Okay. Now let's go geometry. Dynamesh and hit it with the old Dynamesh. Let's clear the mask and then try it. Here we go. So now it's, make sure we turn off groups, otherwise they're not going to join together. There we go. That's better. And just do a little bit of inflate right here on this part. There we go. Right here. Just closing things up, make it easier. And if we lose too much detail, we can always go back and do project history, but I think this should be okay. I'm going to do a quick modify topology mirror and weld to make sure everything's perfectly symmetrical in case something got out of whack. Let's see what it looks like when I turn this stuff on. Okay, not too bad. A few things I need to fix. Let's see. Oh, of course this is not symmetrical because the mandibles are, see how the mandibles are positioned, they're not symmetrical, so. Okay, now let's go in here and just do a little bit of sculpting. And I'll bring up my TW clay tubes brush. And this is where the antennae are going to come out of, and that's what I'm going to make next. This is where we have the ocelli. If you remember, the ocelli are the 3 additional eyes that you often see on insect heads. Not all insects have them, but many flying insects do. Let's see if we can find one here. Well, here's a good example. Ocelli right here. We have them up here. Sometimes they're on a very prominent kind of bump on the top of the head, like I have them here, which I think looks neat. So this is just the space for them. So now let's make some ocelli real quick. We can do that with just an insert sphere. Actually, turn off symmetry here. All right, and these are, put Control Shift click on this. Control Shift click again, Control Shift click on this, so they're all hidden. And then I'll do split hidden. So now we have the ocelli. Let's name them. And every entomologist I've talked to pronounces them as ocelli. I've had one time I got a very angry email from an Italian guy saying they're supposed to be ocelli. Sorry, man. Talk to the entomologists. They say ocelli, so I'm going with that. Let's do this. Control click on that, so everything else is masked. And just do this. Turn off symmetry. And put it in the center. And there we go. Alright. Okay. Back to the head here. Just make sure we turn on symmetry. And let's do this. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. Do a little shaping. Let me bring down the Z intensity. I like to use a low intensity, like 3 or 4, on the clay tubes brush. And then just use this kind of like a way to kind of sand it down and form the shapes that way. A little artifact there, so go. And so, okay, so let me do this now. Shape this a little bit. I'm going to worry about that a little bit later. Right now I want to start working on the antenna. So, let's see. I'm making sci-fi bugs. I know what I'm making. I should hope so. So let's talk about antenna a little bit. No, antenna comes in all shapes and sizes for insects. And as I mentioned last week, you can create a lot of different personality just by where you position the antenna. So you can have antenna closer to the top of the head, like in this mantis, right? I tend to think that bugs look creepier the lower the antenna are, but you can see the kind of variation you get. Like these are like fluffy branching antenna, so you see this more like on moths or beetles or that kind of stuff. For wasps, you generally see more segmented antennae, wasps and bees, and they tend to be fairly long. With flies, you have all kinds of different variations in antenna, so really depends on the type of bug you're making. But this is definitely a wasp-inspired bug. So this, I'm not exactly sure what this is, but it's not a wasp. I don't think it's a wasp but you can see how it has many segments. The antennas serve a lot of different functions when it comes to an insect, but primarily they're used as chemoreceptors, meaning they pick up pheromones and chemical signals in the air from other insects, whether it's for communication or attracting mates or that kind of stuff, or sensing, pollen, that kind of stuff. So that's one of the primary purposes of antenna. They're also used as feelers. I hate when people call them feelers because, I don't know, that's, to me, it seems like probably a secondary feature. But if you look at moth, and this is not a moth, but these types of antennas, they're really of course that's a different type of bug. They're really trying to sweep the air for pheromones, especially like as I said, moths. So I'm going to go kind of with more of a wasp-like antenna. If you look at a lot of flies, flies tend to have, well, like I said, there's a lot of variation, but a housefly is going to have short, stubby antenna. Look at this guy on this. This is a mantid. So you can have this kind of process right here, maybe a joint and that kind of thing. So a lot of fun to be had with antennae. So what I think I'm going to do is something more like classic wasp, and then start with that and see if we can come up with something cool as well. So let's take a look at our wasp. So in this case, we're going to have a little nub down here, a longer segment, and then shorter segments for the rest of the antenna. Let's start with that and see how it goes. And how do we want to start our antenna? We could do Z-spheres, not a bad way to start. Yeah, let's try Z-spheres. So I'm going to append a Z-sphere right here. Turn on transparency and just get it into position. Let's do E for scale and W for move. Oops, I'm going to turn on symmetry so I can move it right up the axis here, and then of course get it closer. So I'm going to bury this in the head, deep inside the head, and then have the two antennae come off of this symmetrically. So Q for draw, and then I like to use the skin shade material. So this is just getting it into position. Okay, so Q for draw. I'm going to start drawing on this and then hold shift so it snaps to that same size as its parent, and pull it out here. And then I'm going to go Q for draw. Let's draw another segment, and then pull this out. So that'd be that base process. I think it's called escape, but I have to look it up again exactly what they're called. And then this will be the main part of the antenna. I'm going to make it nice and long. Let's do R for scale. Oops, R is for rotate, E is for scale. Make them a little bit thicker. I could put, let's do this. I'm going to put a little bit of a bend in here. So I'm just adding some Z-spheres here just to create a kind of a shape. Just a little bit. E for scale. Oops. That's good enough. We don't have to obsess about the shape because we're going to hit A to see what that looks like at Dynamesh. I'm going to go and move this out a little bit more. So here's what this is going to look like. So I'm going to choose Make Polymesh 3D. Remember, when you make Polymesh 3D from a Z-sphere, it makes a copy of the Z tool, which is kind of annoying. I wish it just added it as a subtool. This is the original Z-sphere. So if I press the A hotkey, it turns back into Z-sphere. So I'm going to hide that, and then I'll append my new PM3D Z-sphere. Let's rename it real quick. And okay, and then have a little beer. Keep things going. Okay. So now that I have this, I'm gonna Control Shift click on this once, Control Shift click again, Control Shift click on that. We don't need any of that. So I'm going to go Geometry, Modify Topology, Delete Hidden. And let's turn on Solo button real quick. We'll do Close Holes. I'm going to stay in Dynamesh land for a little bit. So let me increase the resolution here and do a Dynamesh. That's probably too much. Let's do something like this. That'll work. And then get the inflate button, inflate brush. And let's bring this back. And I like my blue material. Okay, I think I inflated that too much. So I'm just going to block out the sections here. Where to go, where to go, where to go, where to go. My all-time favorite brush. Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you, ZBrush. I'm being a pain. And doing some shaping here just to make it look a little bit more organic. Put a little bend in there. I like to put suggest little S curves and bends whenever I can. And then I've done antenna many different ways. Sometimes I'll do like this where I'll actually just kind of draw out the segments. You know, and when you're working with insects, pay close attention to how the segments on the antenna work. Like if you look at bees, all the segments are about exactly the same size, and they're kind of like little beans strung together. Whereas if you look at like some ants, they'll be more like cups that are kind of like embedded within each other. And so each insect is going to have its own personality, or each type of insect will have its own personality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just blocking out segments here real quickly, just to figure out what the overall size is. And I might end up just using this as kind of like a guide, and then I'll just actually, maybe I'll just make the segments and kind of just copy them and use this as a sort of way to position them. Sometimes that's a little bit easier, because when you get into actually sculpting each segment, it gets a little tedious, and then there's a lot of cleanup to be involved, which can be a little bit annoying. But let's do something interesting here at the very end. I'll show you what I mean. Re-Dynamesh that, just so we have an idea, and then let's just take a look at how this works. So what I might do is I'm going to inflate, whoops, that's too much. And just make it a little bit skinnier here, and then fatter towards the end. Another purpose that sometimes antennas use, especially with ants, is when ants will go to war with each other, and ants do fight wars. It's really fascinating. If you get a chance, you can watch ants, especially if you get two nests of ants of the same species, then they get vicious. As E.O. Wilson, the great entomologist, once said, if ants had nuclear weapons, they would not hesitate to use them. They would use them instantly. I know we like to, say that human beings are the most vicious animals on the planet. In so many ways we are, but we actually feel empathy where, ants don't. So ants can be quite vicious as well when it comes to fighting each other. So they'll use their antenna as clubs. They'll actually beat each other up with the antenna. Or if you see two ants of the same species in the same nest encounter each other, right? they want to identify each other, make sure that they're coming from the same nest. So they'll actually rub the antenna across the abdomen of each other ant to pick up the pheromones. And if the pheromones are the right ones, then the ants are like, hey, how you doing? Have a nice day. See you back at the nest. Let's have a party or whatever. But if the ants are of two different nests, then either they'll fight or they'll go and they'll get their nestmates and they'll actually have a war. I've read a lot of really weird books on ants. I highly recommend it, especially if you want to get into writing sci-fi. I mean, the best example in the world is so much of the Alien series was inspired by entomology, the xenomorph and all that kind of stuff. Not just the shape and the look of the xenomorph, but a lot of the behavior, the laying eggs inside of its living prey and all that kind of stuff. It's all inspired by entomology. So there's lots of great books out there. Of course, E.O. Wilson has some of the best books. They're really inspiring if you want to get into that kind of thing. Let's see. It's okay as a block out goes. I think it could be a bit better. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this just as a rough guide. I like this. I'm not crazy about this. So I'm actually going to make some cups and just kind of like duplicate them to follow along this path. So what I'm going to do now is Control Shift and this kind of thing, and I'll do another split hidden. Split hidden is one of my favorite buttons because it's so convenient. And now I have these as two different subtools. So if I select this one and turn on the solo button, oops, come on, this one right here, and I'll just do a quick geometry, close holes. I could just use Dynamesh, whatever, doesn't matter, and keep that the way it is. And then turn on transparency. We can turn off the head for now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a little sphere. Let's do a little bit of shaping. Make a nice little cup. Oh, hello, Philippines. Yeah, I'm envious of you guys. You had the best bugs. I'm hoping to go visit the Philippines sometime soon. Actually, where I live here in Los Angeles, I live in Eagle Rock, which is a lot of Filipino people here. Filipinos on my block. And so I see a lot of cool gardens and stuff, and a lot of great restaurants, too. Okay, so what I'm going to do is so I'm just shaping this into a very simple kind of cup. Something like this, just to get it in place, right? And I have symmetry on, so it's symmetrical. And now what I'm going to do is just what I did before. Let's Control Shift click on this and do another split hidden. So now I have this as its own subtool, and I'm going to do a quick ZRemesh here. Actually, let's do this. I'm going to mask right here. Control W, make a polygroup there. Mask. Control W, and now I'm going to do a ZRemesh with keep groups. And I'm going to set the target polygon count down to, let's just do half. So half of 2,000. Making those polygroups kind of helps determine the topology. So I have a nice edge loop going around the outside here and on the back. I mean, it's not perfect, but good enough for jazz. Let's do a couple more ZRemeshes because I want to make this nice and low poly. That's a little bit better. Get it down to something like that. That's great. That's what I want. Okay. Now what I can do is do a little bit more shaping. Maybe turn on dynamic subdivision. Oh, hey Ryan, how's it going, man? Yeah, I love mud dauber wasps. They're one of my favorites. I got to see some. I got some cool pictures of them. One time I went to Mozambique for a bug shot, and I spent an evening just taking pictures of them in their little nest. It's really cool. Okay, I'm fussing about this a little bit, but that's okay. It's just trying to, since I'm about to make a bunch of copies of this, if I spend a little bit time on this right now, it'll save me a little bit more time in the future. So I have to go back and fix every single one. Okay, all right, so get the old gizmo over here. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Quick, spend a couple of seconds aligning this real quick. Now I'm going to hold control. Whoops, that's not what I do. Hold control. There we go, like that. Clear the mask. Hold control. This tends to make things a little bit faster. Control drag to release to clear the mask. Control this. When you're actually modeling a real bug and you're trying to be accurate, don't forget to actually count the number of segments. It's never a bad idea to do that. I'm just going to get this close to the size that I want and then do a little bit more shaping after that. That's probably more than I need, but that's okay. I'm going to clear the mask and then let's do this. I'm going to go in here and do polygroups, auto groups, and Control Shift click on, whoops, let's do that. Control Shift click on this once, again, and let's do this, whoops. I'm gonna go, since I did auto groups, these are not necessarily symmetrical in terms of the groups. It's created a new polygroup for each side. So I'm going to go in here real quick and just do geometry, modify topology, mirror and weld. That means that now the polygroups are symmetrical on both sides. So that way, as I go in here and remove some of these, it's symmetrical. Okay, so I'll go in, delete hidden, and then spend a few seconds just kind of shaping this a little bit more. I saw, I'm going to complain for a second here because that's what the streaming is all about. About a couple hours ago I was watching TV and I saw an ad for Chivas Regal. Oops. That's not what I meant to do. Okay. Mass by polygroups is what I want to do. And it had 2 ants, and I guess they were trying to get a bottle of liquor or something like that, so they were working together. It drove me crazy because the 2 ants, I guess, were supposed to represent this happy couple on Christmas Eve or something like that. And so the ants managed to somehow get the bottle of Chivas Regal, and then they start cuddling with each other or something like that at the end, just like the human couple is. Anyways, the ant models were okay. The animation was alright. I thought it looked like Turbo Squid models myself, but whatever. But it irritated me because ants workers are sterile females. They're sisters. Not saying that sisters can't enjoy a nice drink with each other, but come on, man. You guys can do some research. Not as bad as Seinfeld's B movie, man. That was all full of mistakes, man. So that's my rant for tonight. You gotta study your social biology, man. Crazy man rants about ants online. Let's save next here. Okay. Oh, my show reel has all kinds of problems in it, but I appreciate the sentiment. I get to update it. If you guys go see Aquaman, I worked on the animations for the end credits. I got to model some Jason Momoa. I spent a lot of time shaping Jason Momoa's buttocks in the past year, so lucky me, and his muscles. The best thing about that job was the fact that Aquaman's outfit is made with hundreds and hundreds of sequins, and the model that I got from the studio had each individual sequin as a separate piece of geometry. So every time I changed the pose, which was frequently because I kept coming up with different ideas for the pose, I had to go back and fix all those damn sequins. But it's okay, you know why? Because I charge by the hour. That's why. Okay, let's go in here and what I want to do is, my brain just stopped. Dynamic subdivision. Okay, so I'm going to choose this guy and pull this out. Make a little club. This is going to be more like an ant. Ants and wasps are very closely related. More insect trivia. That's what you guys pay me for, right? In fact, ants evolved from wasps. So way back in the late Cretaceous period, there was a common ancestor between ants and wasps, which we have named Sphecomyrma. Myrma meaning ant, and Spheco, I believe, is one of the names we use for wasp, other than Vespa. So it was a social wasp that gave rise to ants. And there are some wasps that are wingless. If you ever see a velvet ant, it's actually a wasp, not an ant. You know, what makes an ant as opposed to a wasp? Well, there are some differences that we use to classify wasps and making them separate from ants and so on. It is a human construct, actually, but it is based on real traits and that kind of thing. I'd have to break out my books to tell you exactly what is the difference. Relationship between wasps and bees, obviously they're both in Hymenoptera, so ants, bees, wasps, and sawflies are all in Hymenoptera. And I haven't really researched or read too much about how bees and wasps are related, but they are obviously pretty closely related. I think wasps came first, but I could be wrong. The mortal enemy of ants is termites, by the way. Termites and ants have a lot of wars. there's a lot of similarities, but they're from very different orders. Another cool fact while I'm doing this is that, ants have queens, right? And some species of ants, like say for instance, fire ants, Solenopsis invicta, the queen can live as long as like 20 years. So the queen is basically the egg layer of the nest. So she's not really the decision maker. The decision maker for any social insect is actually the larva, believe it or not. That's what's controlling everything. But what's cool is termites have a king and a queen, not just a queen, but there's actually a happy couple that reigns over the nest. And termite kings and queens can live like as long as 70 years, believe it or not. Believe it or don't, I guess. So, more insect trivia. Of course, you think I'm full of it. Please feel free to read some cool books and come back and tell me that I'm making this stuff up. But I think I'm right. Once again, it always depends on the species. Oh, thanks. I'm glad you enjoy the books. I haven't written one in a long time because I think videos have taken over, which is, I think, great. I do a lot of stuff for the Gnomon Workshop. I did the Maya 2023 series and a bunch of videos for the Gnomon Workshop on insect modeling and ZBrush and Maya and so on. And I also have some courses on Udemy, which are actually focused more about jewelry design, but they are kind of like ZBrush basics and stuff like that. And I'm hoping to do more in the future. But I'm enjoying doing the live stream too, and you can always watch some of my other live streams from previous weeks. But thanks. I'm glad people still enjoy the books. It's been a long time. When I was writing them, I was starting to wondering why on earth I would end up voluntarily doing like the longest homework assignment of my life. Because I think the Maya books, they got up to being about like 1,000 pages. It's kind of insane. I didn't write all of it, but I wrote most of them. There was Mastering Maya 2009, 2011, and 2012. So it was a long time ago. And then I did, the ZBrush books I did was Intro to ZBrush. I did 3 editions of that. And then another book called Maya Visual Effects, The Innovator's Guide, which was kind of a weird book that I thought up would be kind of cool recipes and fun things to do in Maya, but I don't know if they ever caught on. It was kind of a weird book. Looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, that was really strange. But they were fun to write, Well, fun being relative. It's more fun to do videos. But I'm glad you like the books. Kind of annoying because a lot of times my books, the intro books, they would have all the images as black and white. But I also edited some of the books that Maddie Spencer wrote, and also Paul Gabery. I edited his books. He had some really cool books, older books, of course, but they're really neat. I think that publishers have realized that they can't compete in terms of with like YouTube and Udemy and other online resources, so they haven't really put the money into doing the CG books as much anymore. Personally, I can't. When I'm watching the tutorials, I prefer to watch them online. Reading a book and then trying to actually replicate it on the computer is kind of exhausting. Okay, so let's subdivide this and see how it looks. It's a little bit, I wish it was a little bit neater, but it's just going to be a process of going in here and shaping these things. But that's, not a bad way to do antenna. Everything I do is going to require some cleanup, so. but I think it looks better than if I had, and I've done this before, where I'll come in here and try and sculpt in each of the segments on here, and that sometimes just turns into a horrible mess. It takes a lot more work to get it to look good than doing it this method. Let's take a look here. I'm going to get rid of some stuff. Let's save this. I'll do save next. A single ant can live that long, but what about a married one? Well, single individual ant worker probably doesn't live that long. And actually, they go through stages. Again, depends on the species, but in a highly socialized, all sand ants are social, meaning that it's the nest that's the organism, not the individual. Just like the individual cells in your body, right? What is you? Are you you, or are you the cells in your body, right? Because each individual cell has a relationship with all the cells around it, whether it's a skin cell, blood cell, liver cell, pancreas, brain, etc. You can't really point to one cell in your body and say, that's the cell that's controlling everything else, right? All the cells in your body are working together. Even your brain cell, where's the main cell in your brain? You don't have one. It's a collective network. It's the same thing with social insects, right? In fact, social insects, and why I'm so obsessed with them, is they're one step beyond us in terms of the organization, right? Because an individual ant is made up of cells just like we are, or metazoa. So all those cells are cooperating. You're going to be sorry you asked this question, by the way. All those cells within an individual ant are cooperating to make that ant, right? And then there's another level where all the individual ants within a nest are cooperating with each other, making one giant superorganism. So if you could imagine all the cells in your body having the ability to split apart, run into the environment, and then come back, kind of like the bug creature in the original Men in Black, that's kind of what an ant colony is. So typically with ant reproduction, you have basically what happens, and I think I mentioned this last week, but I'll go over it really briefly. You have a virgin queen, basically, who splits off from the nest, leaves the nest, and goes out, mates with 5 other ants in the air at the same time. This is fire ants, by the way. They might be different for other species, but it's a good example. And then those male ants drop dead instantly, so it was the best night of their lives, and then it's over. And the female ant goes off to found the colony, starts laying eggs immediately, and the first eggs are the first helpers. And then all the ants in the colony, of course, are sterile females who are related to each other. So in that sense, you never really have a married ant. But termites, you have a king and queen, so they are kind of married, and they live longer. So I don't know. Draw whatever conclusion you want from that. There's a really cool book by E.O. Wilson called Superorganism. It's massive. It has beautiful illustrations and photographs, but it really gets into the weeds about all this kind of stuff if you're really curious about it. There's another shorter book he wrote called Kingdom of the Ants, which is basically kind of like excerpts from the superorganism. So if you don't want to commit to like a huge book that takes forever to read, you can read Kingdom of the Ants. It's a good one. I'm going to delete this, and now we're left with this. And let's turn on everything. Turn off transparency. Turn off the Z-sphere and turn on the head. Let's see where we're at. So I think right now what we want to do, or what I want to do, is let's hide the rest of the body and just focus on this. So I'm going to turn off mask by polygroups. So I think we could make the antenna a bit more interesting. I mean, this is okay, but the theme of this is pushing it. So let's see if we can push it a little bit more. I will say the one thing that's really cool about some wasps, like if you look at a tarantula hawk wasp, their antenna will actually go into these like curvy spirals. So let's see if we can get a more interesting shape here than just... Now, I mean, ideally, if I was going to rig this for animation, I'd probably want to keep these things fairly straight. Doesn't, yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, it's not that big a deal. I have done rigging for insects where I'll make an individual bone for each and every segment in here, and that usually works pretty well. My rigging skills are okay. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert at rigging, but I usually do stuff that's good enough for me. So let's make this a bit more alien. The other thing I will say that's really important when you're doing insect design is don't ever forget about the hair at the very end. Hair really makes an insect look realistic, and it's a really important feature to have. It's kind of like if you create a human character and you never give him or her eyelashes. Eyelashes are so subtle from far away, but if they're missing, you just know something is wrong. Doesn't quite look real. And then you throw on the eyelashes and all of a sudden the realism really comes through. It's the same thing with insects and hair. Even those, you know, some insects the hair is very faint and it's hard to see, it's still there, and just by putting a little bit on, when it catches the light when you render it, that really takes it to the next level and pumps up the realism. The other thing I like to do, and you know, you learn this from photographers, is whenever I'm doing a render of an ant or an insect, like in a natural setting, if you could put water drops in the insect, that really makes it look nice and juicy and makes it a much more satisfying image. And you can look at like photography of dragonflies and stuff like that and see how the photographers will go out early in the morning and when the dew is still on the plants and the insects, they'll find some sleeping insects, because insects do actually sleep, and that still have dew covered all over their bodies, and take some brilliant pictures. Those are always really enjoyable. Or you'll see sometimes you'll see pictures of jumping spiders, and they'll have a big drop of water on their head that they're wearing like a hat, which is really cute. But a lot of times the photographer is actually, you know, using an eyedropper to put that drop on its head. So it's cheating a little bit, but of course, with AI, you probably wouldn't even have to go outside anymore. You just take a picture of the rug and then put an insect in there for you. Right? So I'm curious, how many of you guys out there watching this who are CG artists, how many of y'all spent a whole lot of time making a model, texturing it, rendering it, being very proud of your work, and then putting it online just to have some idiot accuse you of using AI? Because I think I've noticed that's happening a lot now, even with stuff that's obviously not AI. It's kind of irritating. But, you know, it's like people who don't know what they're talking about will always accuse you of using their AI. It's kind of like everybody saying everything is Photoshop now, even when it's not. But oh well, that's the world we live in now. Yeah, it's a really good question. I do have an animation plan that I want to work on, which I'm actually working on with a friend of mine who's a scientist. His name is Greg Abbott, and he's a specialist in dragonflies and damselflies. And I asked him, it was a long time ago, I asked him if there's one thing I could animate that he would like to have an animation of, what would it be? And he said, there's the mating process of damsel and dragonflies is very fascinating, extremely difficult to describe. So that's something that I want to do. I want to do an animation of. I guess that's bug porn right there, isn't it? But it's cool because the damselflies will form a little heart when they're mating, which is very sweet. So I have some papers on that, and I just need to get around to actually doing it. The other thing I'd really like to do is something discussing how antennae actually work and comparing different antennae from various different insects, as you can see, because I'm obsessing over these antennae right here. Because I did a series on eyes, and I thought the eyes were really cool, so it seems to make sense that maybe antenna would be something that would be cool to do next. And I started doing a series comparing the mouth parts of various bees, like a regular honeybee versus an orchid bee, and I started working on it. Unfortunately, this year was extremely difficult for me for a lot of reasons, which I'm not going to go into right now. So I haven't been able to keep up on the on Entomology Animated, but I'm hoping to get back into it. But it's really nice of you to say that you enjoy the series, because I really need to get back into it. There's so many cool topics I'd like to cover, and I'm always trying to look for a topic that is difficult in any other medium other than animation, right? I don't want to recreate what a photographer can do. And then there's a great YouTube channel that has hundreds and hundreds of high-speed, slow-motion video of insects flying and walking. It's Ant Lab, and it's really great source of reference. But I'm very jealous of how prolific that guy is. Of course, he works in a laboratory and he has high-speed cameras, and he's an entomologist, so he can spend all his time doing it. But it's a great resource, and I don't necessarily want to recreate what somebody like that is doing, because it's unnecessary. It's already been done. So I think, insect societies, the evolution of insect societies, is such a huge topic. I'd love to get into that more. Even just, the mating, solitary wasps versus social wasps versus parasitoid wasps and parasitic wasps. Another interesting fact about wasps is, for a long time people thought that beetles were the most diverse group of insects on the planet, because there are some 400,000 known species of beetle. But what they've recently discovered in recent years is that for every species of beetle, there is a parasitoid wasp that preys on that beetle, individual species. So that means could be as much as 400,000 species of parasitoid wasps, which is only one, and then there's all the other wasps as well. Parasitoid meaning that it's kind of like a parasite, but often ends up killing its host, as opposed to a genuine parasite, which will not kill the host and just feed off of it. Right, so it's kind of parasitic behavior, but not perfectly. That's what parasitoid means, I believe. Hopefully I'm not wrong about that. But anyways, that means that wasps are even more diverse than beetles. So there's a lot of species of wasps out there. There's a cool photographer nerd guy on Instagram who goes by That Wasp Guy. I highly recommend following him, because he has beautiful images of wasps and lots of cool wasp facts and wasp merchandise and so on. And I follow him. I always enjoy his posts. That's the other thing I'd like to do, is I'd like to do a series where I interview an entomologist, have them talk about their favorite topic, and then use that audio as their narration to animate what they're talking about. And I think that would be really cool. So we'll see. I just gotta find the time. Oh, thanks. It's really nice for you all to tell me that I'm inspiration, because a lot of times I just feel like I'm a weird dude that just sits in my studio making bugs and nobody's paying attention. It's kind of like one of those people they encounter on the X-Files, They had to bring in that one expert, and he's the weird dude sitting in his basement modeling bugs. Hopefully not the bad guy in the X-Files, because that usually ends badly for them, Okay, so I don't know. It's different. It's starting to look like a longhorn steer or something like that, but I like it. Let's just go with it, Let's take a look at this right here and do a quick Z remesh. me try this. ZBrush, let's do half and keep groups, and let's of course save next because we don't want to crash. And every time I save, we get a sip of beer. Sir Mix-a-Lot. The guy had a lot of interesting things to say. I like big bugs and I cannot lie. We have to. That would be a great Weird Al song, you know. Weird Al is sleeping on the job. Maybe someday I can meet him because I have some other suggestions. I think Weird Al should cover the Joy Division song and do his own version, which would be She's Lost the Remote Control Again. I think that'd be awesome. There was another one I came up with the other day, and now I can't remember what it was. But if he did a cover of Sir Mix-a-Lot as an entomologist who loves big bugs, that would be very cool. Okay, let's subdivide this a few times, and let's go in here and just do a little bit of detailing. I'm going to probably come back and do more detailing on the segments of the antenna, but it's not a bad idea to shift to something else for a while and then come back just so you can look at it with fresh eyes. I'm just going to come in here really quickly and do some detailing. Just a little bit. You gotta make you gotta make sure there's a little bit of wobbliness here, and especially in the edges here. That will add a lot to the realism. I usually do several passes over each part of the insect, and each pass will add more and more detail until I run out of ideas. So I don't want to go crazy yet, but just to establish something here, I think is nice. This is when, looking at scanning electron microscope images are always cool. I have several books of just that on bugs, and those are always really cool reference. My friend Thomas Shahan, who is an amazing photographer, especially of jumping spiders, and actually a very good 3D modeler himself, and a scientist. He actually had a job where he got to operate a scanning electron microscope for a while. Kind of jealous of that. That would be a lot of fun. The other thing I'm going to be doing for Entomology Animated, with the help of my good friend Irene, is we're going to start putting together some merchandise, t-shirts and stuff. She's actually already designed a couple, and some other things, and we'll have them on Redbubble. I'm going to make a store for the website for entomologyanimated.com at some point. Because you got to have the merch, man. That's what everybody's doing, right? So we're going to start adding stuff to the store there, and as we add more and more, I'll start displaying it here so you guys can see it. I'm still kind of developing it yet, but I'd also like to do some cool images on display. They do the metal prints of artwork. So does ArtStation, of course. So I want to do some of that. I got one of the one piece of artwork. It wasn't a bug, it was this vampire queen that I had designed a long time ago. ArtStation did a metal print of it, and it just looks amazing. I mean, there's a very luminous quality to those prints that you just don't get out of any other type of print, that I just think is fantastic. So I want to do more of that. It's just a matter of finding the time and getting getting it where I want to have it. Okay, one thing I don't like is this is intersecting. So what we're going to do now is let's create a folder for the antenna. So I'm going to select this, new folder. I'll just call it antenna. Throw this in here. And now I'm going to go in here and do transpose set. Pull this out like this. All right. There we go, that's better. Now I think I need to work on this head. Sorry, I'm answering questions. A Twitch stream, there's somebody wants to know what's going on here. So, okay. Save next. Drink beer. Everybody have a good Christmas. Get some cool stuff, I hope. I got 2 brand new nephews. How cool is that? Okay, let's take a look at this. We can make this, I think, a bit more interesting. Let's shape this a little bit. I mean, it might be nice to kind of echo this pointy shape right here a little bit. A long time ago, I was into the idea, which I don't think it's a bad idea, but I was going to make my own short film about an imaginary planet and all the bugs that live on that planet, right? So I think we've all had that kind of similar idea before. It's not a bad idea. I mean, that's basically what Avatar is. They just put a plot around it, right? So I started researching bugs, and I started actually sculpting my own bugs, right? And I thought I was being extremely clever, and the designs I was coming up with and everything was like really wild. And I thought up the whole biology of these bugs and how they related to their environment and so on. And I was very proud of myself. But every once in a while, I'd read a story about a real bug that existed here on planet Earth. And they were always, the biology of those bugs were always 10 times more interesting than anything that I could come up with. The fig wasp is a good example of just a really wild insect that has a very interesting relationship with figs. It's like its whole life cycle is based on the life cycle of a fig. And once I read about that, I was just like, you know what? I give up. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to spend some time just studying actual insects and modeling them and really focus on that for a while before I try and play God and come up with my own bugs. And so that's kind of what I've been doing for the past few years. And that was the inspiration behind Entomology Animated, which was to come up with a way to online to explain for free some really cool aspects of insect biology. And so I worked really hard on that insect vision series and tried to see what was out there and see how I could improve upon it. But, you know, it's true. There's not a lot of great stuff. It's gotten a lot better. There's a few people who are doing really cool YouTube channels now that have a lot of great insect information on it. But in terms of animation or animated things, there's still not a whole lot that is informative. There's stuff that's entertaining, but it's not so much about, I'm trying to figure out ways to kind of promote an appreciation for nature and science online among not just, creature designers and guys like us, but also people who are just genuinely curious. Like I said before, always trying to find ways to use the medium, to use the advantages of CG as a medium to show things that could not be shown easily in other mediums. So that's kind of my goal with the whole thing. It'd be really cool if I got some funding, anybody out there, any billionaires who might be watching this, maybe instead of buying a yacht this year for your favorite child, send me a few $1 million so I can make bug animations. And as much as we all kind of dread the advent of AI to a certain degree because it's very scary. It means we don't know what our future as artists is going to be, or if we're going to be appreciated, or if we're even going to be needed. It's true that AI is going to affect every single industry. No one is safe from AI, so it's a very scary time. But it's also frustrating because we've all spent years and years and years developing these skills and this knowledge and all that kind of stuff. We hate to see it disappear overnight and not mean anything, because any knucklehead with ChatGPT can do the same thing. But the flip side of that is that ideally AI would allow us to do a lot more, right? So if I was going to do a full-fledged movie on, say, the evolution of insect social behavior, it's very hard to do that as an individual artist or as a small team. And the hope is that AI would help with that kind of thing. And make some tasks a lot faster and a lot easier, so that we can create more high quality content. But every technology always cuts both ways. I don't think when Twitter came out anybody had any idea what a massive impact it would have on society or any social media, both negative and positive. When Twitter came out, I remember it was just a goofy little thing where you could just announce to the world whatever idiotic thought you had in your mind, but nobody at the time really thought, means a lot of people are going to be expressing idiotic thoughts online. But such is the way of technology. How can we get your blue texture? This is a shader, and you used to be able to find it on Pixelogic's website, but they've reorganized everything, so I'm not exactly sure where you can find it now, but it's called, the name of the material is MAH Dirty Blue, and MAH is the initials of the artist who came up with it. So you might be able to find it on Pixelogic or Maxon.com if they still have the resources and the materials, the free materials that you can download. But the other thing is, if you want to know, let me take a quick aside here and show you how you might be able to actually just make it yourself or something close to it. Let me save this real quick. Is there any new tutorial for jewelry next year? I would only use ZBrush and Rhino for jewelry design. Do you have any advice on your workflow? Yeah, if you want to take a look on udemy.com under Keller, look up my name, Eric Keller. I have 3 courses available on udemy.com. One is the fundamentals of ZBrush, which goes over all of the interface. I have another series that's on the difference between Dynamesh and Nanomesh and ZRemesh and all the other kind of stuff that just goes through each one. And then I have a third series that is how to model a violin using ZModeler, starting with just background image and going all the way up to a printable, castable version. So those are the latest tutorials that I have, and you can get those on udemy.com, and they're also on ZBrush Jewelry Workshop. Let me see, pull this up real quick. So if you do a search for Keller, go away, on udemy.com, this one is Understanding ZBrush Geometry, ZBrush for Jewelry Designers, and hopefully that violin one is still up there. I don't know who these other people are. Advertising other people's stuff here. That's no good. Yeah, here we go. Understanding ZBrush Geometry. So I have those on Udemy, and I'm hoping to do more tutorials next year because I really enjoy making tutorials. I think they're a lot of fun. Okay, so let's take a look here. So let's go into the material palette, and let's go to the dreaded red wax. Where is red wax? What happened to red wax, guys? I might have deleted it because I hate it so much. But let's take a look at matte cap materials. I guess red clay. We can start with that. Okay, so if I go in here, and let's go into modifiers. And then the first thing we want to do is you can take a look at this right here. So matte cap materials work by combining two different colored spheres and shading it based on the lights on those spheres. So one thing you could do is you could come in here and actually start to change the hue and see if you can get like a bluish or something that's just more pleasing to the eye. Let's see. You can also try clicking on this and seeing if you maybe you can add a little blueness to it like this. Let's see. And maybe pull down the saturation a bit. Now the thing I like about the mod Dirty Blue is it does have a little bit of that specularity to it. So let's see if we can get some of that in here. Let's see. Let's take a look at mod Dirty Blue. Not crazy about the way that one's looking, so let's try matte cap gray. Play the cavity transition a bit, and then play with the hue a little bit. It's getting closer. So a lot of it is kind of just playing with these dials here. Changing these colors here can sometimes be a little bit of a mystery as to what they're actually doing. But the nice thing about it's like the Mod Dirty Blue and why I like it so much is it really brings out some of the details while you're sculpting on it. So, and a lot of that has to do with the cavity detection, cavity transition. So as you're playing with these, you can get it to a point where the cavity detection and transition is a little bit more exaggerated so that you can kind of see the brush strokes. And then I think the other thing is, finding a color that, the problem with the red wax material, which is literally, I'm shocked to say it's not here anymore. I don't know what they did with it, was that red color kind of would wear out your eyes a little bit. Another thing you can play with a little bit is the wax modifiers. If you pull up the wax, and of course, it's going to tell you that you need to turn on wax preview, so I'll choose OK. Go into the material, go into the render palette. And we want to see, where's this stupid button? Wax preview right here. Turn this on. Then as you increase the wax modifier strength, you see how you get that kind of softness. I mean, that can be kind of cool. You have to be careful though, because too much of it is going to make it harder to see the details because of the subsurface kind of quality to it, but it can be kind of nice. You can also mix materials. So right now I have, this is a matte cap material, and matte cap materials don't actually react to light. So if I go up into here in the light and I start moving this around, you see how we don't see any change in the model. But if I go into, say, one of these standard materials like this one, let's say basic material, and I move the light around, right, you can see that that actually changes, and that can be helpful while you're sculpting. So you can actually mix materials. So I could take my matte cap gray material here, and I'm going to choose copy shader. And what this does is this copies all of these settings into the clipboard. And then I can go down here and maybe find one of these materials under standard materials, like let's say this tri shader material, right? So choose tri shader, and this is basically 3 different shaders layered on top of each other. These little buttons right here allow you to turn the shaders on and off, right? So I'm going to click that one on, click that one so that both of these are off. I'm going to go over to this shader, slot 1, and choose paste. And that's going to paste that matte cap material that I just created in here, right? So now I have a matte cap material as the base. And now what I can do is I can go over to this shader and turn this on. So this is going to layer this on top of this, right? So this is on top of this, just like layers in Photoshop. So it's a little bit on the intense side. So what I can do is maybe take down the diffuse and the ambient a bit. So just have maybe that little bit of diffuse in here, but I have that specularity. And then I can go in here, maybe bring that specularity down just a little bit, and then go to the curve here and start to adjust this so it's not so shiny and wet looking. So now what I have is this material layered on top of this material, and now as I move the light around, it's actually that specular highlight will react to the light, but the matte cap material underneath it won't. So that's a nice way to kind of create a material that maybe is a little bit easier for sculpting, because that specularity really helps reveal the forms. I think this is still a bit too intense, so maybe I'll bring it down a little bit to something like that. And then what you can do is you can play with all of these different settings in here, and then come down here to the mixer and start to play with how the material is layered on top of each other. So right now this is set to replace, but this is just like the blend modes you see in Photoshop, right? So I could set this to, say, screen, so that just that specular highlight is layered on top of my matte cap material. Or you could even play with something like multiply or whatever, making it really dark. So these are kind of fun to play with. So let's see if I do this to lighten, and then you can actually play with the Fresnel and just, so this, all you're doing is saying, how is this layered on top of my other material? If I turn on black, then that's kind of like, it's a strict screen right on top of the other one. So that's, and then if you come up with a material you really like, of course, you're going to want to save it. And this will save it in the ZMT format. There's a lot to the ZBrush materials, and then of course you have the Redshift materials on top of that. So, but maybe that's kind of helpful as a place to get just as a place to get started. Thanks, G-Man. That's really nice of you saying that. My secret is doing this ZBrush since 2004. That'll help you gain, and then write a few books on it. That's very nice of you to say. I really appreciate it. We'll just call this purple nurple. Yeah, actually I had to write a few chapters on ZBrush materials back in the day, so I learned a lot of it that way. But that is a really great way to make ZBrush materials. So, I hope that's kind of helpful. But, failing that, if you can, let's see really quickly, I'm going to go see if they have put on, because the old ZBrush website, okay, that's not Maxon that I'm thinking of. That's called, okay, let's see, maxon.net. I don't know if they still have the, yeah, this is just installers. So let's see. Okay, search. Let's look for materials. Nah, I don't want this. I want... You guys remember the old download page? Anybody know where they might have that anymore? I think it's long gone. I hate to say it, but the free Z materials are gone. Brush system, sculpture freedom, flexible workflow, remeshing, how it got, blah blah. Search for matte cap. Nothing. Custom materials. Okay, so these are some videos. Wow. So much for that. Anyways, that's where I got the Mod Dirty Blue. So if you go to green metallic, maybe play with that a little bit. Say with go down here to modifiers, and because the matte caps, the way that matte caps work, I'll just okay, we got a few minutes left here. So let's take a quick look at the way matte caps work. It's basically, it's taking this image, and this is like a Photoshop image, right? 512 by 512. So you could literally make an image like this in Photoshop, a square image with a sphere, and it's looking at the normals of the surface. So it's looking at that preview, so you can see where there is a highlight in the center there in that rendering, right? And so it's saying all the normals that are of the surface that are facing that similar direction, put that highlight there, and put this edge lighting right here. So there's edge lighting right there that matches the sphere. And you can kind of tell that they're doing this. If you take the orientation and you start rotating this around, you see how I'm rotating the image, and it's almost like I'm changing the light in the scene, right? So if you look at some of these other materials, like our friend, this one, in this case, it's using two different images. It has this very shiny sphere on one side and a very dull gray on the other. So what you see on the left side is A, and what you see on the right side is B. So when you take a look in these modifiers and you see hue A, hue B, right? That's A and B. Now the A and B doesn't do anything if you're using a material that just has one image. Then you would just adjust anything that says A. But if I go in here to my material here, and let's say I go and I start changing the hue for just A and then B, you can see that, you know, the B is going to be very subtle. But as you start playing with these sliders for A versus B, you got to see, like, if I move this all the way over here, you can see how it's affecting that image, which is then affecting the render, the way it looks. So what you could do is you could go into Photoshop, make a rectangular image, and literally paint two spheres side by side. Or you could render, say in Cinema 4D or Redshift or Maya or Blender or whatever you want, two spheres side by side and crop them kind of like this. Export that as like a Photoshop image, and then you just go in to the texture palette, you know, import that texture, right? Using this button, and then you can go down here, click on this, and let's say I use that texture. Well, I just changed the texture. So you can make your own custom matte cap textures based on rendering a sphere or even painting a sphere, and you can come up with some really wild looking materials that way, like this giant eyeball, or say this kind of, and I've messed with the hue here, so that's why you get this kind of thing. So that's basically what it's saying. Talking about matte cap, it's capturing image from that, capturing rendering data from those images that you've imported. Does that make sense? ZBrush matte cap library. Is this still online somewhere? Let's see. Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, they're here. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. So, want to make things easy? Just go here to matte, and down here, right here, is the two versions of the mod Dirty Blue. You just click on it, download, put it into your Z startup folder, and there you go. Thanks so much for posting that, because I used to be able to find it easily, and then they move things around. So, because I think if you just go to pixelogic.com, I think it sends you straight to maxon.net, right? Yeah, so that's why I was getting confused, because I kept going to pixelogic.com and I end up here, and it got really frustrating. So, secrets of the internet. That was a very long-winded answer to your question. And then, of course, I've messed up all my materials. Well, we'll play with this one a little bit. What was the other one? I like the other one I was making. Purple Nurple. There we go. So I think what I'm going to do here now for the head, in the last few minutes we have, is let's do a Z-remesh, so we can get into something that's a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to go, let's just do, I'm going to do Control-W to create a polygroup, and then I'm going to mask, say this, and this, and this. And I'm masking this because I want to create a polygroup so that I can use the polygroups just as a guide for the topology. And I mentioned this last time, is that, we can see we got a little hole here. Okay, let's do this. Let's clear the mask, get the old inflate brush here, close up that hole, and do a Z-remesh. Okay. So I'll do kind of like, you know, I often do like a Dynamesh just to get the basic concept down for the shapes. And once I start getting to the point where I want to detail, then I'll do a Z-remesh so that I can create a low poly version of the model that has, you know, decent topology, right? So I'll do that, and then if I decide if I'm going to make this for an animation or like a final model, then I'll go back and do hand retopology wherever is necessary. And hand meaning either I would do it, you know, I used to do it with quad draw in Maya, Sometimes I'll do it with the Z modeler and ZBrush. But as I mentioned before, you can get away with a lot in topology on insects because they don't deform the same way that like a character's face would. So sometimes the Z remesh, like on leg segments and stuff like that, sometimes it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do a hand retopology for something that's essentially just kind of like, you know, it's like a balloon animal. The segments are really simple. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to spend hours and hours and hours doing, well, or minutes and minutes and minutes doing hand retopology when ZBrush does a good enough job for those parts. But maybe like the head, I would probably do hand retopology. So I'm just going to do a quick, let's do Control W, right? And then clear the mask, and then I'm going to do, let's Control click on here so we have something we can project from, and ZRemesh, keep groups. Let's do adaptive, and I'm going to set the target count to 100,000. Let's see how that comes out. Thanks, Esteban. I appreciate it. Okay, so so now let's do half, and I'm just going to see if I can get this kind of low poly, because when you have that low poly model and you can subdivide, it makes it so much easier to smooth things out if things get too lumpy or messy. So when you can see how the poly groups here are just kind of helping to guide the topology in around like the mouth parts and up here. Again, it's a super fast way to retopologize without having to spend all day on it. And we'll do like one more. There we go. Good enough for jazz, right? Now I can subdivide, and let's do a, let's go back to that purple material. And we'll do project history, da, da, da. Here we go. Smooth this out a little bit. Subdivide again. Let's get up to like 1.3 million. Do project history. A little bit of cleanup. Now I can work with this. So now I'm going to start smoothing this out and maybe coming up with some cool details. So, oops, that's not what I wanted. I want this. Let's take a quick gander at the old reference. Let's see what cool stuff we have going on here. This is the part that I love the most. All these little divots and pores and stuff like that. That's one of my favorite things to do. I've shown in the previous live streams some of the techniques I use for making that. But I'm just kind of looking at these lines here, seeing what I can come up with. These separation, these different plates, these little processes right here are so cool. Look at this guy. You know, when thinking about details and looking at reference, you know, look at the personality for each insect, and you get so many cool ideas. So, for example, this is a tiger beetle right here, one of my favorites, and I love the ridges here, these lines that really outline the forms and how those lines sort of morph into sort of more like bubbly dots. You know what I mean? So that's a really cool thing to be inspired from. And then you take a look at some of these other bugs. This one, you know, this is a like a grasshopper. This kind of stuff right here, these processes and these ridges and the pores. Some bugs will have pores that will be different sizes and somewhat randomly placed. Others will have very regularly placed pores, and then obviously when the hairier bugs, they'll be coming out of that. When we get to the hair, I'll show you some of my techniques for placing hairs in those pores. This one, not terribly hairy, but it's got a few. But you can see as you zoom in really close, it has a different type of textury noise to it, and then these kind of it's not like a fold in a muscle, right? Because these are not, this is a sclerite, so the material is a bit more like your fingernail than skin. But you still have tension here. This tension right here, that's the stuff that starts to make the insect look really alive and really interesting when you sculpt it. This one, I had to double check to make sure that's even real, but I believe that is a real mantis. It's pretty freaking crazy. So this is a spider. Well, here's another tiger beetle, but notice that even though it's a tiger beetle, it does have those ridges, but now it's like a totally different fingerprint. And it is surprisingly symmetrical. Not perfectly symmetrical, but surprisingly. And look at how it fades here from a very prominent to, it's almost like, ripples of sand on a beach, And that kind of, fading out, that kind of subtlety and attention to detail is what's going to make your insect designs really pop and look realistic. See how we have mostly lines, but occasionally little dots in here and little dots right there, and the separation between the plates and these lines. So this is the stuff that I'm going to be thinking about as I start to model the head. And you can see I've kind of blocked them in here already. So now it's just a matter of kind of playing with it. And the nice thing about, of course, designing your own insect is that we can really start to come up with our own kind of language, shape language for this particular species of insect. I will say that one thing that the things that drive me crazy that I see in insect designs and concept designs that I really can't stand is I don't like it when people skimp out on the eyes and they don't really, because the eyes are one of the most beautiful parts, and really getting that pattern in there I think is such a huge part of it. The other thing is when we get into wing veins, and I'm going to be doing wings for this guy in upcoming live streams, really thinking about the wing veining and making intelligent decisions that way I think is important. But you can see how I'm kind of using the shapes that I've worked with before, and now I'm just kind of like sculpting around them and playing with making them wobbly. And I am sculpting perfectly symmetrical, and I know my good friend Irene is going to give me a hard time about that later. But that's okay. She's right. But what I'll do is I'll do everything perfectly symmetrical for a while just because I'm lazy, and then eventually I'll go back in, turn off the symmetry, and start to make differences in the from one side to the other, so it's a bit more realistic. But at first I'm going to do everything symmetrical. Now, of course, my mandibles are not symmetrical, so let's turn on the solo button so that doesn't bother us too much. I just need to reposition those the mandibles at some point so they're not overlapping. All these little marks that I made, with the clay tubes brush, I'm going to keep those in there because there's kind of like an undercurrent of detail that I think is going to look really neat later on. It kind of helps keeping it organic. But, it's like thinking about the flow of the different plates and how they react when they meet each other. A lot of what insect exoskeleton is trying to do is it's trying to keep moisture out, because moisture is not good for insects. It leads to things like fungal infections and bacterial infections. So it's doing its best to keep moisture out as much as possible, but it also has to create flexibility and structure, because this is actually acting as just like the bones inside your body, right? It's an exoskeleton as opposed to us. We have an endoskeleton. And there also has to regulate input and output, because it still has to get pheromones and other chemical signals to its nervous system so that it can detect its surroundings. So it's got these competing needs here between keeping moisture and infection out, but also letting information in. Information meaning chemical signals and also literally food, right? So there's a lot of interesting things going on, and so thinking about that when you're sculpting these details, think about the tension of those competing needs while you're making this, and you can come up with some really interesting designs. At the very least, it's just kind of a subconscious thing that I think the audience will read when they see the insect up close and what makes it look so cool. You know, because you also have hairs and a lot of these things that are coming out of various pores, and again, anything that's an opening is an opportunity for bacteria and fungus to get in there. And you guys, I'm sure, have seen a lot of the cordyceps footage from planet Earth and that kind of thing. There's also a lot of flies. There's phorid flies, are a type of... Geez, I only got 6 more minutes and I just got into phorid flies. It's definitely going to be to be continued here next time. But just to leave you with something to think about, there are ant decapitating flies. These are phorid flies, and what they do is they actually will land on an ant, so they're incredibly small, much smaller than an ant, right? So they'll land on an ant, they'll lay an egg in the space between the joints or the space between the plates and the abdomen, and this egg will enter the ant's body and grow, and it will migrate all the way through the body, all the way up to the head, and that's where it will start to grow into a fly larva. And when it reaches it, and the ant will still be crawling around doing its thing, right? But eventually the larva will get so big inside the head that the head will pop off, and the ant will of course die, and you'll have a fly larva crawl out, which is like 10 times worse than the xenomorph and the alien, because the head is popping off now and a bug is crawling out. And they even have footage of an ant head crawling around by itself because it's got a little larva in it. So if you're looking at like footage of leafcutter ants, is a good example, and they're going about their business, taking the leaves and bringing them back to the nest, you'll see that on the larger ants, there'll be a smaller ant that's riding on the back of the larger ant. And that smaller ant's job is to keep the flies away, keep the phorid flies away, because they're that dangerous. So that's really freaking crazy. If you want to see my work, check out www.entomology.com. Oops, entomology animated. entomologyanimated.com, and also my website is www.bluepatone.com. Those are my two main. Blue Patone is my main portfolio. Of course, if you go see Aquaman in theaters now and watch the end title credit animation, you'll see some of my work there. The animation, the software that I generally use, ZBrush primarily, Maya primarily. I'm learning Blender right now, so I'm making the transition to Blender. For texturing, I'll use Marmoset or Substance Painter, and I've used other software packages like Modo and Lightwave and that kind of stuff in the past. So, are any of my models out there? Eventually, I will probably set up a store where I might sell some of my models. I don't like to sell too many of my models because that's how I make my money. But I will probably be selling some STLs of my jewelry models and that kind of stuff. So check that out. But yeah, you can see a lot of my work on my website, and then my Instagram is bluepatone01. So you can follow me on Instagram. I post my artwork on there and other stuff. So okay, so I think that's going to wrap it up for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the live stream. Really great questions. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble about various insect things. At some point, I'm going to have to read another book because I'm going to run out of insect facts. But next time, which should be next Wednesday, I believe I'm going to be doing it 7:30 on Wednesdays in January, because Ashley Adams is going to be before me, and we want to have a little buffer between us. So on Wednesdays, quit your job, because it's going to be creature modeling with the great Ashley Adams, followed by me doing some bug stuff. And I'm going to continue this model, this concept, until it's done over the next, I don't know how many sessions it's going to take, but after I finish the head, I'm going to move on to the thorax and the abdomen and the wings and the legs and all that kind of stuff. So, and then I'll do texturing and all that kind of stuff. So you guys will get to see the entire process from beginning to end on this thing, at least in ZBrush. So thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time. And just remember to, next time you see a bug, think twice before you kill it, right? Unless it's a mosquito, go ahead and kill a mosquito. We hate those things. All right, thanks, everybody.